Dune is a game of diplomacy, political intrigue, and military control set in Frank Herbert's universe. It is a game of negotiation, allegiances, bluffing, and treachery between players as they play one of 6 factions with wildly differing powers and abilities, all competing to take control of the desert planet Dune. Acclaimed as being the perfect marriage of mechanics to theme, the game features area control, combat, resource gathering, closed bidding and traitors, successfully capturing the atmosphere of the novels. It's a timeless classic amongst board games and one of the best 6-player experiences in gaming. In 1979, the game design team responsible for Cosmic Encounter designed Dune for Avalon Hill, firmly setting the game on the hostile desert planet of Arrakis. It fused the asymmetrical player powers of Cosmic with the warring factions of the Atreides, the Harkonnens, the Emperor, the Fremen, the Bene Gesserit, and the Guild, echoing the political machinations within the novels. The big-budget Dune movie was released in 1984, and Avalon Hill re-released the game with a Sting look-alike on the cover and added 2 expansions. The duel adds a new type of person-to-person leader combat to the game. The Spice Harvest is a complete mini-game that is played before the setup of the main game, where the factions vie for the best starting positions. The game system continued to evolve with the release of optional rules and other factions in Avalon Hill's magazine The General. New factions, the Ix, Bene Tililax and the Landsraad, were added to take the player count up to 9. A French edition of the game was released by Descartes in the late 90s. It featured brand new artwork and it included both Spice Harvest and the Duel expansions and extra treachery cards. But all editions are now sadly long out of print and continue to fetch high prices on eBay. For a game long out of print, the past few years have seen something of a renewed interest in it due to DIY print-and-play versions available on the Board Game Geek. There is an active and thriving online community based around the game. Various elements of the original game have been modified and added to, like adding extra card decks to facilitate ease of play. Talented designers and illustrators have created beautiful versions of the game, totally re-envisioning the board and all components. Scott Evert's designs and Ilya Baranovsky's Art Deco inspired version stand out. These labours of love offer a design vision and attention to detail above and beyond many official board game releases. Over the years, the rules to Dune have seen various official editions and variants, as well as many unofficial house rules. Recently, there's been an online project to sort through all these disparate rules, to compile an official and authoritative version of the rule set. It's this revised rule set that I'll use to go through how to play the game. Dune has a set of straightforward basic rules, and then on top of those are the players' factions, which have unique abilities to bend or even break those basic rules. For this brief video overview, I'll go over the main game mechanics and then briefly touch upon each faction's abilities. Components. I'll be using my copy of the Descartes version to illustrate how to play the game. Note the components are in French, but I have a handy translation sheet and play aids. For this video, I've set the game up for the recommended 6 players. The game board features a map of Arrakis containing 4 types of territory: yellow and brown for sand, grey for rock, red for a stronghold, and the white polar sink in the middle. Territories are what the player armies move into. The map is also divided into 18 sectors, which mark how the storm moves around the board. This is the storm marker. This will move a random number of sectors around the board each turn, wiping out any exposed troops in its path. There are 6 player dots around the map to determine player order. The Bene Tililax regeneration tanks for holding dead leaders until they are revived. This is the spice deck, which will show how much spice is found and where on the map. This is the treachery deck that features the weapons and defences needed for going into battle, and also cards with special abilities and events. It's best to have a full hand of these. These are the spice markers. Spice is the currency of the game and is needed by all players. These are the storm movement markers, which dictate how many spaces the storm will move each turn. Each player has a game shield that summarizes his faction's special abilities. Each player also has 5 large discs showing a leader and his fighting strength, and also 20 army tokens. There are also 2 combat wheels which allow players to secretly select forces to commit to battle. Setup. To set up the game, the spice markers are put in the spice bank and all card decks are shuffled. Place the storm marker in the sector marked Storm Start. Each player chooses a faction to play. Each player places their screens near the closest player dot to their seat at the table. Players then put their leader discs face down in the middle of the board where they are shuffled. Each player then picks 4 discs at random and chooses one of them to be in his pay as a traitor. He makes a note of this traitor. All leaders are then returned to the pile, turned face up and recovered by their owning player. Then follows the specific setup instructions for that faction on their player shield, placing army tokens on their designated areas on the board and the remainder in their off-planet reserves. Players then receive the designated amount of spice markers. Then finally each player draws 1 treachery card. Object of the game. Each faction has a set of unique economic, military, strategic, or treacherous advantages. The object of the game is to use these advantages to gain control of 3 or more strongholds, either on your own or as part of an alliance. Sequence of play. There are 15 game turns. Each turn is composed of several specific game rounds, with each player taking his turn before moving on to the next round. At the start of the storm round, a note is made of the new turn. A storm movement marker is randomly picked and revealed, and the storm marker is moved anti-clockwise that number of sectors. If the storm marker passes over or stops on any army tokens in a sand territory, they are destroyed and sent to the tanks. Some territories occupy multiple sectors, for example Cielago North. An army is safe if it is in a territory with sectors not yet affected by the storm. Any spice in a sector over which the storm passed or stops on is removed to the spice bank. The storm movement marker is then reshuffled and a new one is placed face down near the storm marker, ready for next turn. The storm round also determines the first player each round. The player dot the storm is approaching is now the first player, and will go first in every round this turn. Play then proceeds anti-clockwise. Round 2. Spice Blow. The top card of the spice deck is turned over and resolved. If it shows a territory, then the amount of spice markers indicated is placed on the Spice Blow asterisk in that territory. If that sector is currently under the storm marker, then no spice is placed. The Spice Blow round then ends. But if the card is a Shai-Hulud sandworm card, the Spice Blow round ends and a Nexus Round immediately occurs. It is in this round that alliances can be formed and broken. I'll look at this in detail in a minute, but when the Nexus is resolved, the last territory card that has been turned over is where the sandworm appeared, and all army tokens and spice markers in that territory are destroyed and returned to the spice bank and the tanks respectively. On the first Spice Blow round, if a Shai-Hulud card is turned over, then it is put back into the deck and reshuffled. There can never be a Nexus on the first round of the game. Nexus. All players have a chance to make, break or join alliances. Players may freely discuss amongst themselves the advantages and disadvantages of joining forces. An alliance may contain any number of players, although more strongholds will be needed to be conquered to win the game. Once made, the alliance is announced to everyone. Once all players have had a chance to ally, then no further alliances can be made or broken until next Nexus round. If the allied players' army tokens combined together, control the required amount of strongholds at the end of the turn, then the allies have control of Dune and they have won the game. Round 3. Bidding. At the start of the bidding round, any player who has no spice may call out Chome Charity and may collect 2 spice from the spice bank. It is in this round that players bid to acquire treachery cards. The treachery deck contains weapons and defenses for combat and powerful special events cards. A player may not have more than 4 cards in his hand and is not allowed to bid if he does. A player is nominated to be the auctioneer and deals as many cards face down as players allowed to bid. The first player opens the bidding for the leftmost card. He may bid 1 or more spice or pass. Bidding then goes round the table anti-clockwise, each player bidding more spice or passing. The highest bidder wins the card when everyone else has passed, and he pays the amount of spice bid into the spice bank and takes the card into his hand. The player to the right of the first player is now the first person to bid on the next card, and so on until all cards have been auctioned off. Round 4. Revival. The cost of combat in Dune is high, and in this round, players can revive up to 3 army tokens and 1 leader from the tanks. But there is a cost. Leaders can only be revived once all 5 have been killed, and then only 1 per turn, and at the amount of spice equal to the leader's strength. Army tokens are revived at a cost of 2 spice per token, and are placed in the player's reserves. Round 5. Movement. This movement round is split into 2 segments, shipments and maneuvers. A player can first make 1 shipment of his army tokens from his off-planet reserves to any 1 territory on the board, even if there is another player currently occupying that territory. The cost of shipping into a stronghold is 1 spice per army token, or 2 spice per token to be shipped into any other territory. Shipments cannot be made to any sector currently under the storm marker, or any stronghold with 2 or more players in it. After a player has shipped, he may then move any group of army tokens from 1 territory to another adjacent territory. The occupiers of Carthag and Arakeen have access to ornithopters, and they can move up to 3 adjacent territories. Sectors have no effect on movement, except that armies can't move into the sector in a territory that is under the storm marker. When a player has finished his maneuvers in a territory with several sectors, he must make clear which sector his army is occupying. If after the movement round there are different players' army tokens occupying the same territory, then battle must occur. There are a couple of exceptions to that. The Polar Sink is a free haven to all players and can be occupied by all players at the same time. And 2 players in the same territory cannot fight if the storm marker separates their respective troops. To resolve a battle, each participant secretly formulates a battle plan by selecting a number on their combat discs. This number can be between 0 and the total battle strength of all the army tokens they have in the disputed territory. Then they choose a leader that hasn't been used in another battle this turn and add that to the combat disc battle plan. Then they choose from their treachery cards a weapon and a defense and add those to the battle plan. The combat discs and battle plans of both players are then placed face down on the table and revealed simultaneously. Each player checks to see if the opposing leader is one of the traitors on their list of traitors. If a leader is found to be a traitor, then that player immediately loses the battle, and his leader and all army tokens go into the tanks, and all treachery cards played in his battle plan are discarded. If there are no traitors, then the treachery cards are looked at. For every weapon card there is a specific defense card. For example, the shield defense will stop a crysknife attack. A leader is killed if he did not play the specific defense card and is immediately placed in the tanks. In this case, both leaders played the required defense, so neither die. Any surviving leaders are then added to the battle strength number selected on the combat disc. The player with the highest total wins. The winner receives the value of all defeated leaders in spice from the spice bank. The losing player loses all the army tokens they had in the territory to the tanks and must discard all the treachery cards they used in that battle. The winner also has to lose army tokens, to the value of the number he selected on his combat disc. So you never want to commit all your troops to battle. You have to leave some back to share in the spoils of victory. The winner can keep or discard the treachery cards they played. Round 7. Collection. Starting with the first player, all players with army tokens in the same territory as spice markers may now collect that spice, but they can only collect 2 spice markers per army token. Uncollected spice remains for future turns. Round 8. Control. It is in this round that the victory conditions are checked to see if any single player or alliance holds enough strongholds to claim victory. For a single player, 3 strongholds are needed. For an alliance to claim outright control of Dune, it will depend on the size of that alliance. For alliances made up of 2 players, 4 strongholds are needed, and all 5 strongholds are needed for a 3-player alliance. Okay, so that's the main rules, and they're pretty straightforward. But the fun of Dune is in each faction's unique abilities and how those abilities break the rules I've just gone through, and the player interaction and negotiations those abilities cause. So, depending on the faction, which all have their strengths and weaknesses, each player will have a different strategy for victory and have a unique way of playing the game. The Atreides uses their spy network to look at the treachery cards players are bidding on. He uses his prescience ability to see part of an opponent's battle plan in combat. The Harkonnens excel in treachery and receive more treachery cards, and also have more leader traitors than the other players. The Fremen have an intimate knowledge of Dune, allowing for predicting the path of the storm and for better movement as they can ride sandworms. With a few conditions, they win the game if no player has won by the end of the last turn. The Emperor is rich with a steady supply of spice, as he receives all the spice from the players' bids for the treachery cards. The Guild control all space travel, so they receive all the shipment fees from the other players, and it is cheaper for them to move. With a few conditions, they can win the game at the end of the final turn if no one has outright control of Dune. The Bene Gesserit can use the voice to influence their opponent's battle plan, and they can coexist with other factions peacefully in the same territory. They do not pay for their army tokens to be shipped down onto the map if they send the tokens down as spiritual advisors to another player's shipment. And at the start of the game, before setup, the Bene Gesserit have the power to predict which faction will win the game and in what round. If that prediction is right, then it is they who have won the game. That's a brief summary of the faction's abilities, but they can be further added to with advanced abilities. And when factions ally, they can share their abilities with each other, which leads to some interesting combinations of powers. Another level of complexity is added with the Karama cards in the Treachery deck. Karama cards can trigger special abilities and cancel out opponents' powers. And finally, a brief word about the duration of the game. It's very unpredictable, and a game of Dune can last anything from an hour to 6 hours. Fortunately, there is a variant of playing only a maximum of 10 game turns, which brings that time down to something more manageable. And that's my brief guide to Dune. If you can find a copy on eBay, or if you can make your own copy via the files on Board Game Geek, then this is a 6-player game not to be missed.